in this beautiful city. You can have a pasta class right in the window, just walking through the streets. Or you can stumble upon this beautiful chocolate shop right next to where I live with all these beautiful chocolates. Or you could stumble upon this beautiful store about Pinocchio. But today, I want to talk about why Italian streets are always so narrow and how the light hits the houses in very narrow streets. So narrow streets in Italy, they're not just aesthetic choice. So they didn't build them narrow because they're more beautiful, they're more romantic, which is true, but that's not the reason. The reason is that in medieval time and during the Renaissance, the cities were designed for survival. In other words, when you were living in the country, you were assuming this risk of being exposed to maybe even people from other cities that were coming to conquer your city, or the elements, which was a big thing back then, floods or fires. In the country, you were not protected, but in the city, you were very protected. So the streets were extremely narrow because there was a need to cramp up as many people as you could into a small area and then protect it with walls, clearly. So, but also it was a climate issue because in Italy, as you probably know, it's extremely hot in summer. And of course, there was no air conditioning. And so the shade was only possible through those shutters that you can see in this painting. Or if you made narrow streets. Exactly. So if the street was more narrow, there would be more shadows inside the street. So it's like almost like a canyon where light just barely enters and then it immediately leaves. The buildings also were made of stone, and they are still made of stone today. And stone has this really cool ability to absorb heat and then to release it slowly at night. So a lot of times in Italy, especially in summer, you're gonna still feel the heat of the sun even after dark, because all the walls will release the heat of the sun. And if the streets are narrow, it creates sort of like an oven in those streets. So it's interesting because also the narrow streets will provide ventilation, so it will cool off quickly. But not all the streets will be ventilated. So it's very common in Italy to have this double effect of really nice wind coming through the streets, but if you touch the houses, the stones are incredibly hot still. The other thing I want to mention is narrow streets. They had a defense and control purpose, because narrower streets were easier to defend. So if there were invaders coming to your city, it was much easier to defend your city if the streets were narrow. The cities were often designed just to confuse the outsiders, and this is especially true in like small medieval towns. You can sometimes get even lost, and you thought you knew where you were, but actually you don't. So, and this is quite common. And the streets just twist and turn, and they narrow, and they get into a plaza that you have never seen before. Like Siena, for example, in Tuscany, it's typical like that. Actually, there's a whole bunch of streets that are curved, and they go around the main plaza, Piazza dei Miracoli. and it's quite a feat actually. Also, another thing you might notice in Italian streets, they are extremely difficult for cars because, of course, they were not designed for cars. The entire landscape was not designed for cars, and it wasn't even designed for horses and buggies. These came a lot later. As a matter of fact, horses were not really welcome inside the cities. As I mentioned before, Siena still has a tradition that they still have horses inside the city, but it's mostly for historic reenactment. They have this yearly competition called the Palio. Look it up; it's actually quite interesting. And basically, it's a horse race in the middle of the plaza. And it's extremely interesting because in the Palio, the horses go through the city. So let's talk about the light and how it behaves in these narrow streets. It becomes almost like poetic because the light doesn't flood the entire street, but it slowly descends from the top to the bottom. And so one thing that I don't really show it very well here, and I'm really sorry about it, when you're painting an Italian street, because there is always so much light on the top, you're gonna see underneath the roof, you can actually see it here. So underneath the roof, you're going to have a lot of shadows. Then you're gonna have a clear area, almost like a bright area. The windows that are towards the top are going to be the ones in the sun. And then as you descend towards the ground, the part of the building that's closest to the ground, it's going to be the darkest one. And I know it's kind of counterintuitive because during the day, everything should be in the sunlight, but remember, this is a narrow street, so the sun bounces off of the other building on the other side, and it reflects and it goes back to the other building. So it's almost like a rule, and you can see this almost in photographs. If you take a picture of a narrow street and then you look up the picture and you kind of squint your eyes, you're going to be able to see that the light on the buildings in narrow streets, it's darkest on the bottom, and it gets lighter as you go up. So it's kind of a rule in this case. And the most beautiful light in Italy, of course, it's rarely the direct light, but it's the reflections. Italy is a magical place, at least to me. And a lot of the light in these little streets is actually completely reflected. It's not direct light. So the light also changes depending on the time of the day. Like in the morning, you have these really cool shadows, and midday you have really high contrast. I think this painting is done midday. This is like a noon, 11 o'clock, something like that. And then in the afternoon, you have the golden hour, which is a whole thing we should talk about. But basically, it's when the light becomes golden. It's like a yellowish, almost like a fog. And everything reflects that light. And then during the sunset, everything can turn red depending on the sunset, but usually the light gets a lot softer. And if you noticed, I don't know if I'm doing it right here, but if you noticed, the bricks on those buildings, they cast really big shadows because they are, despite the fact that this is a small watercolor, I can't really show it here, but the bricks on the buildings, the more light you shine on them, the more defined the shadow is going to be. It's very difficult to show it here, but I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. So this is the painting. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope you have a wonderful day, and I'll see you in Italy when you come to visit.